Good afternoon, everyone who is in attendance today. Firstly, I would like to extend my thanks and gratitude towards the staff of the MBA Center, my fellow coursemates, external examiners, and especially my supervisor, Dr. Professor Watatan Teck Hong. My name is Ho Ming Jack, and today I'll be talking about the focus of my research, the state of flexible financing for first-time homeowners in Malaysia. So, without further ado, this is my outline for my presentation here today. And let's get on with the introduction. Well, according to a MGI 2017 report, the estimate housing affordability will be an issue faced by about 440 million households by 2025. This will then be a $650 billion per year problem that is required to address. In the Malaysian context, as we can see on the table on the left, over the past 10 years, according to the MHPI, the average property prices in Malaysia has risen by about 96.4%. In a Bank Negara report in 2017, they suggest that this could be an issue due to supply-side failure of the market not supplying the right type of housing at the required amount or at the required locations. And in another study, Arundel 2017, regarding the demand-side failure, due to labour market and house price volatility in this period, first-time homeowners of this generation are less likely to accumulate equity in the same amount as the generation before them, and along with shrinking average unit sizes, they are more likely to delay starting a family, which presents its own range of problems regarding the quality of life and average productivity of a nation. And it's a separate matter altogether, unrelated to this focus of the research. Hence, this research is focusing on an alternative financing scheme that is supposedly trying to address this very issue via the rent-to-own model for home financing, and in particular by the biggest provider of this scheme in the country, by Maybank Islamic, and their product called HouseKey. For the purposes of this research, I wanted to take a holistic approach in understanding the issue. Hence, I compared how Malaysia fared policy-wise to our closest neighbour, Singapore. But why them specifically? Well, because in many key areas we are alike, and therefore makes comparisons easier to see and analyze. Secondly, in any product, the key is in its implementation. I wanted to study what the Malaysian version of this product is and roughly how the public perception for this product as they are currently. Based on the objectives, my research questions are straightforward and are therefore structured as such as we can see in the slide. Moving on to the methodology for question 1. How do we compare? For the first question, I utilize a document analysis, or i.e. literature review, in order to inform myself of the research. In the research conducted by M. Ramesh in 2005 and Fang in 2016, they primarily discussed the housing affordability in terms of structural policies that shape housing markets in Malaysia and Singapore, namely the role of central authority and provident funds. Based on their research, I come to know that the relative affordability as calculated by the median multiple is essentially the same between both countries along with their average per unit sizes. However, the outcome of it is that 90% of Singaporeans live in affordable housing, while for Malaysia that number stands at around 50%. This has been attributed towards the more effective implementations of HDB CPF integration in home financing in Singapore. As a note, in Fang 2016, 55% of CPF withdrawals in Singapore is for home purchasing. This clearly shows the HDB initiatives are backed by a large pool of capital from CPF. Secondly, land laws were highly favourable to the Singaporean government up to 2007, but as mentioned in Fang 2016. As of the year 2007, 90% of the land in Singapore is owned by the government. Most Singaporeans finance their home purchase in large part by withdrawing from their CPF account 1, which accounts for 60% of their funds. The equivalent of that in Malaysia is EPF account 2, which accounts for 30% of the funds, which for most Malaysians isn't enough to cover the 10% down payments, and therefore they mostly have to resort to bank mortgage loans as the main source of financing. And according to our survey, 90% of respondents opted to do so. In comparison, according to Bank Negara report in 2017, housing policies in Malaysia are largely managed by over 20 different state and federal level agencies, each pursuing their own goals and objectives, oftentimes overlapping in nature, thus wasting funds and time. In question number 2, we ask ourselves, what are the available product offerings in the market and what do the public think about it? Product analysis is tabulated and calculated into the calculation matrix as provided in my research paper. The parameters were based on typical mortgage loan terms and public disclosure sheet provided by Maybank Islamic and in their product Housekey. Historical ROIs on alternative investments are based on publicly available data. As we can see here is a condensed summary of the calculation matrix as I mentioned previously. In order to gauge public perception, I have conducted a questionnaire survey that was shared primarily on forum-based social media like Reddit and Laoya in relevant topics or threads. The main focus of the survey can be broken down into these 3 parts: Respondent Demographics, Respondent Preferences, and Respondent Opinions. In Respondent Demographics, demographic targeting was largely considered effective as the majority of the respondents was in the 26 to 35 age group, 48 out of the 97 respondents. In the survey, I wanted to make sure the pool of respondents was also diverse enough to reflect the opinions of the people on the national level. Based on this diagram on the lower left, that seems to be the case. On another note, median multiple of the pool of respondents seems to align with that suggested by M. Ramesh in 2005 and Fang 2016. In fact, their estimates may be on the conservative side for this pool of respondents. Additionally, if we look at average property owned by age class, and we see the age class of 26-35, it's lower than expected for this age group by a significant amount. With regards to respondent preferences, in the study conducted by Arundel in 2017, she mentions that youths are delaying their involvement in the housing market. So one needs to ask, where are they putting their money to invest then? In the diagram on the top left, illustrates roughly the preferences of the survey respondents towards parking their capital in various investment vehicles. From the survey, the top 3 by order of ranking in the median investments preference are as follows: employee provident funds, property, and then only stocks. By contrast, the top 3 by order of ranking, the median of preferred investment preferences are as follows: property, index funds, then stocks. From my research paper, I concluded that the main forms of investment can be said to be ranked based on ease of access. The investor has less input on the matter. However, when compared to preferred forms of investment, the investors prefer more control in their investments. And when it comes to preferred financial institutions, we can see that the preference is concentrated by a select few financial institutions, namely Maybank, Public Bank, and CIMB. It's no wonder then that the largest provider of rent-to-own financing scheme is also the bank that is most preferred for home loans. And in terms of respondent opinions, in general, I concluded that the general perception towards rent-to-own models is one marked by skepticism. Many are either unclear of the specifics of how it's implemented or wholly unconvinced it's a better solution for themselves. However, at the same time, over 70% are convinced that investing in the housing market right now or the next 5 years will prove beneficial to them, perhaps expecting a further rate increase of house prices following the recovery of the economy after the pandemic. In the findings and discussion portion of this presentation, these are the two main things that I would like to stress upon. When we compare government interventions in the housing market between Singapore and Malaysia, one thing is quite evident, which is their priorities. If we look at some of the most well-funded and longest-running government financing aids in Malaysia, namely Prima, PPAM, and Rumah Selangorku, their priorities are more narrow towards poverty alleviation by providing low-cost housing. What do I mean by that? For example, when it comes to programs like PPAM and Prima, specifications for these units are typically lower than what the developer would sell to non-applicants, as the government agency also mandates the material and features in those units. The program also limits to whom the developer can sell to. In the example of PPAM, they are only allowed to sell those units to civil servants. And they also impose limits on homeowners. They are limited to who they can then resell to. For example, in PPAM, again, only to other civil servants. These units are typically sold for 20 to 25% less than the standard units in the same building. Hence, we can say that this is not really a discount, rather a light version of the standard offerings by the developer. With all these limitations, you would think, why would any developer involve themselves in these government programs? For one thing, there are advantages to this program for them. Namely, developers who are developing lands that are eligible for this program typically have expedited processing by the local town councils, and they are also typically charged a lower land tax rate from a 4% to a 3% in the case of Kuala Lumpur at least. In conclusion, both Singapore and Malaysia use government mandates to regulate house prices. However, in Malaysia's case, it's directed towards a small minority, whereas policies set by HDB applies to everyone, and therefore their actions have a meaningful impact in the housing market. Specifics of this matter can be expanded in the Q&A. With regards to unequal outcomes, what do I mean by that? In the calculation matrix, we show that taking into account alternative investments one can choose to make with the extra capital afforded to applicants at the beginning of the term will greatly benefit applicants who could have afforded financing via the traditional mortgage loans to begin with. Therefore, complex financial products such as this may not be recommended for everyone. So onwards, finally, to the conclusions and recommendations. Looking at the research so far, it would seem as Malaysians would much rather utilize financing provided by private sector rather than advocating for the government to undergo land reformation that aims towards an equitable distribution of property equity rather than merely poverty alleviation. Rent-to-own model in Malaysia does have its potential, but we must be wary of its potential to deepen the wealth gap to a larger degree if it's ever adopted by the mainstream market. As for recommendations, if we are not going to do the Provident Fund financing route like the Singaporeans and go for the rent-to-own route instead, we need to be understanding of the inherent disadvantages faced by underprivileged groups, namely first-time home buyers. Just limiting the access to this sort of financing to first-time home buyers as is implemented now is simply not enough, as the loopholes present a minimal hurdle. A more effective method is perhaps by ensuring competition in this space. Having more players would force providers to tailor their products to the specific needs of their various types of clientele, offering different loan rates or features perhaps. Additionally, the government could play a more active role in this area, similar to the Affordable Care Act in America in the healthcare insurance market. An effective government rent-to-own program that is open to all Malaysians could serve as a benchmark for all other service providers. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.